Okay, and we're now live. So, welcome to everyone in our audience to a new conversation and new. Well, we call those the webinars in for the España Confidencial channel. My name is Hugo Estornello Silva. I'm the Hispanic America correspondent for España Confidencial, and today we're joined by Professor Michael Rectenwald, who used to be a professor at NYU as well as many other universities in the United States. He used to teach, about liberal arts and, a number of other things. And now he's joining us to talk well, about a number of things as well. So welcome, Professor Rectenwald. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
All right. The first question I usually ask our guests in the program is for them to introduce themselves. So if you would like to do a quick introduction of who you are and what have you done and what's your main area of expertise, that would be great.
Yeah, well, I was a professor at NYU for 11 years, and prior to that, I've taught at Duke University and Carnegie Mellon and Case Western. Uh, I'm primarily a scholar, and what I consider myself now to be an intellectual entrepreneur. I effectively write and speak on issues involving economics, politics, free speech, the internet. I've written 11 books, most recently a novel called Thought Criminal, and before that, a book called Beyond Woke. Before that, a book called The Google Archipielago, The Digital Gulag and the Simulation of Freedom. And before that, Springtime for Snowflakes. And before that, 19th century British secularism. So I'm an avid writer and thinker, and write for the Mises Institute, and I do some other things as well.
Well, I recently read an article you wrote for Mrs. Wire in which you told the readers about your intellectual journey from Marxism to libertarianism. So I would like you to explain a little bit more about what happened in your intellectual life and how did you change from one such a school of thought to another very different to that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very simple in a way. I became aware of the totalitarian nature of socialism and the left by their treatment of me in the university when I spoke out against wokeism or woke ideology, and was attacked by the left in droves, in great numbers, and then I started to rethink my whole world outlook. I had a major gestalt shift, a whole paradigm shift in thinking, and I came to see the mistakes in Marxism, the very serious mistakes, and the falseness of the creed. And I saw that, first of all, you can't abolish property without first destroying people's rights. Property being an important first right, in property in oneself is the primary right of any person. And so then I did a lot of reading in the Austrian school and other economic schools, but particularly Austrian and Mises and Rothbard. And, I mean, I just came to have a very serious critique of socialism. And so it was a very big gestalt shift that way.
In your article, you also mentioned that you were probably one of the first victims of cancel culture. Can you explain us a little how did that happen?
Yeah, I was probably one of the first victims of cancel culture. In fact, I was canceled before it was called cancel culture. I I started this Twitter account called the Anti-PC NYU Prof and started tweeting criticisms of social justice on campuses and the institution of bias reporting hotlines and safe spaces and trigger warnings and all of these things. And I was attacked by this social justice mob in the university, and they effectively ended my academic career. They didn't end my intellectual career. In fact, they probably started it in a new way. And so they effectively ended my academic career. I retired from NYU in good standing, however, with after I sued 5 colleagues for defamation of character, and we settled in 2019. So I wasn't really a loser on the end of cancel culture. They can't beat me. They can never beat me. I feel like I'm like, well, I'll just say that I'm the MMA of intellectual thought. I'm the main fighter. They'll never beat me.
Well, you used to teach liberal arts and, well, about the history of ideas, I think, at NYU. And
right.
One of your main interests while you were teaching there was about the processes of secularization and the ideology of secularism. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was a scholar of 19th century British science and culture, and I still am, really. I wrote about this movement called secularism, which arose in the 19th century in Great Britain. It was founded as such and named by George Holyoake in 1851. So I got involved in the whole secularization debate. There's a big raging debate in the academy about whether secularization happened, or if it's happening, or was it just a myth? And I entered into that debate pretty strongly and argued that religion is never going to disappear. It can't be eradicated because everybody must posit something a priori. There's no way to get away from positing something without having evidence of it. And everybody starts from first principles that have to be given, that have to be assumed. So I think religion is forever, and the idea of secularization as some inevitable process is nonsense. We see religion moving into different spheres now and different registers. I would say Marxism is a religion. I would say social justice is a religion. I would say wokeism is a religion. Woke ideology, woke, the new rampage going on today. Socialism itself is a religious conviction. So religion is here to stay. So the question becomes which religion to embrace, really, or whether to try to stay agnostic with reference to all of them. So that's kind of the gist in a real nutshell of the kind of work I did in secularism and on the secular movement, secularization as a process, and secularism as a worldview.
Well, do you think that this process of secularization that the Western world has been going on for the last centuries, maybe the reason that we're seeing so much of these totalitarian movements, from the fascism to socialism, communism, and now progressivism and the woke and PC culture and everything?
Yeah, these are replacement religions, and some are worse than others. Let's look at the Soviet Union in the 20th century, for example. I mean, atheism was basically the state religion, and you couldn't disavow it. You couldn't counter it. Religious people were persecuted, put in the gulag, murdered, tortured, and everything else. So it was worse than the Inquisition by thousands, if not tens of thousands fold. The idea, and then wokeism is another religion, and these are totalitarian religions. So in place of religious toleration, which came about by the late 18th century, we've gotten totalitarian religions. So those creeds that were oppressed, like atheism, throughout history, came to become totalitarian when they ascended into power. I'm against all religious totalitarianism, and I believe in allowing people to have their own beliefs without having them enforced or imposed either by religious or political state agencies. The only rights that exist are individual rights, and the only way you can preserve them is through individualism. So individualism is the only way to preserve anyone's rights. I would say that what I don't want to see is a kind of reactionary religious right movement again that then becomes as bad or worse than wokeism. That would be a travesty. So we have to, right now, we have to posit the values that are workable and try to argue for them without force.
Do you still think that any kind of institution, whether it be the state or some kind of a private agency that has power over people, still has some kind of religious leaning?
Yes, I mean, right now we can see that, like, as Cuba is rebelling against dictatorship, communist dictatorship, ironically, the United States is becoming more like Cuba. And so it's very ironic that the Cubans, and it's a sad irony, that as the Cubans wave the American flag, the American state is actually leaning towards communist ideology, and it's permeated the entire the social body, the political apparatuses, every aspect of American society, politics, economics. It's everything. And then this is not just coming from the U.S. This seems to be a desideratum of a global elite who are attempting to impose socialism on the ground for the vast majority while they enjoy an oligarchical monopoly on top. That's what the Great Reset is all about.
Well, with the pandemic and with all of the lockdowns, well, there was a huge change in the way institutions and power and even money is used.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes,
I know we're seeing a great change, and in the ground level, we're seeing that people are becoming poorer, and that the elites are becoming a lot more richer and a lot more powerful. We only have to see at the G20, at the G7 meetings.
Yes, and they're doing that while they're speaking about equity and inclusion. So they're spreading this idea of socialism to the masses to get them to accept this two-tiered feudalism that they're imposing. A neo-feudalism is really is the agenda, where we have a kind of static hierarchy with the masses basically in a kind of static, non-progressive, having all their rights and property and so forth abrogated, taken away, while the super oligarchy controls all the resources and the production, and they drive all production towards these particular monopolies. And they're monopolizing everything, including information. They're monopolizing the media. They're monopolizing news, social media. They're going to start to try to monopolize money to to a much greater extent by instituting a universal digital currency, and then forcing all buyers to buy from only approved vendors. I mean, it's just an abomination. And so how the socialism fits in is that socialism and woke ideology fit in by virtue of habituating the population to this belief that they're not worthy, or that they should give up their property, or they're going to have it taken away and they should abdicate it, and that everybody will be happy with nothing, having nothing, and no rights. And we saw how the COVID lockdowns destroyed millions and millions of small businesses across the world, millions in the United States alone. What is the United States? The United States is the last bastion, I'm afraid, that they're trying to get a hold of. And even Klaus Schwab of the WEF said that national sovereignty is a barrier to the Great Reset, and they must get rid of it. That is, nations having their own sovereignty is an obstacle to this global agenda. I mean, they admit it straight up. He said this recently. So the Great Reset's the object. I mean, that's the means by which they wish to bring about this new kind of corporate socialism, I call it, or techno-neo-feudalism, with a kind of static hierarchy, no rights, no property for the masses, total control, and maybe even the elimination of parts of the population on purpose, because they don't want to. They don't want these resources. They believe, I guess, in climate change as a existential threat to humanity, and they don't want us running around in cars consuming carbon fuel, fossil fuels. And so they're telling us everything about how terrible it is to run an air conditioner or to drive a car, and they're driving gas prices up on purpose. They're trying to obviate or get rid of, to make obsolete the combustion engine, the oil, any kind of oil use. So it's a master plan, and it's on the table. They're not hiding it. There's nothing hidden here. It's not a conspiracy, because there's no hidden clandestine objective. It's completely open and on the table. They're not hiding this at all.
There are some similarities of the Great Reset policies promoted by the World Economic Forum and the Chinese model.
Yes, the China is the model for this entirely. That is to have these corporate monopolies who make profit at the top, and everybody else lives in actually existing socialism on the ground. And this is kind of this collusion between the state and corporations. These particular approved producers are allowed to produce and make a profit. Everybody else is driven out of business. There's no, it's the erosion and disappearance of the middle class or independent production is one of the objects. They've got to get rid of that. That's why they're allowing the destruction of property while they allowed for a whole year the destruction of property by COVID lockdowns and by the mass movements of Black Lives Matter. This was a way to get rid of these middle-class property holders. These are the Antifa and Black Lives Matter. They're merely the ground troops for the oligarchs to undertake this.
Well, there are some similarities between this perspective on trying to protect individual property rights and so on and so forth, with some aspects of classical conservatism, such as small is good because it allows for more diversity. Yes.
I would call it either classical conservatism, but it really is classical liberalism. That is the belief in, the free market is never, ever attained, but it should be an object, a goal, and it's asymptotically approached. That is, you never reach it, but it should be maintained as an ideal, because when it's maintained as an ideal, then you have more freedom of people to do what they want economically and otherwise. And so there is a very strong tie-in between individual rights and the freedom of economic self-determination. And this is what their enemy is. See, monopolists of both the socialist and corporatist capitalist type, they have a common enemy, and that is the free market. That's what they're trying to destroy. Free market is what is the enemy of both socialist and corporatist capitalists. This is what the left doesn't understand. They're too stupid, I guess, to get the point. They're just dumb because they see everything in these ideological blinders. They're told that here's capitalism and here's socialism. They're against each other, and you can't say there's going to be a corporate socialism because that's a contradiction. And like, it messes with their heads because they can't think. They're brainwashed. They're brainwashed, so they're not able to actually have thoughts, you see. It takes actual thinking to be able to arrive at the kind of conclusions that I'm arriving at. But they don't allow this, and this is part of the game plan. This is why socialism is being pushed on the masses, because it keeps them in the thrall to this very narrow idea that there's no way that they could be setting up something like a corporate socialist neo-feudalistic system, which they are setting up.
Do you think that big tech and enterprises like Google, Facebook, and all of the social media giants are behind this brainwashing, especially of university-age kids and people
Yes.
who are in the academia to try to promote this kind of socialism, of corporate socialism?
Yes, the big tech is like the leading ideological communications apparatus and surveillance mechanism for enforcing all this. They are the leading edge of corporate socialism. They are absolutely essential to its establishment because big tech controls information and they control news. And they're also going to be controlling even individual communications, to the point where now Biden is proposing that text messaging be censored and for disinformation or any criticisms of the vaccine or the virus responses. All this is going to be censored now, and disinformation will be disallowed. This is part of the whole totalitarian control. Big tech is a totalitarian regime. They are the digital equivalent of the gulag system.
That's what your book, the Google Archipielago, is about, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's all about that.
Yeah, but you see the thing with big tech and everything is that, well, they are using these fact checkers, and these guys are right now they are the censors of every kind of information we're receiving. For example, here in Latin America, we're receiving a lot of news about the Cuba situation, and especially some of these news, they are being censored by fact checkers who are telling us that this is delicate content or something like that. There is no other reason to censor them.
They're telling us here in the United States that the Cuban rebellion has to do with people demanding more COVID shots, and that it has nothing to do with communism. They're not even mentioning that, because they don't want us to get any ideas, because they're imposing communism on us. So they don't want us to think that Cuba is actually revolting against it. That's why I don't think this is a color revolution instituted by the CIA. I think it's actually a spontaneous uprising. And if it is a color revolution, there is a spontaneous organic element to it. And they'll use it. They'll crush it in any case, because it's against the direction that they're going. The Cubans they're going against history. they're on the wrong side of history, according to the mass corporate, big digital socialist agenda.
There was an article in
All of
the
a sudden,
New York
okay.
Times that yeah, all right. There was an article at the New York Times about the Cuba situation in which they tell the readers that the protesters were screaming freedom and other anti-government propaganda. So I know that actually corporate media and every kind of information group is
Yeah,
actually
freedom.
promoting a really government-loving ideal.
Yes, they're trying to figure slogans like freedom as anti-government. They are anti-government. In that case, they're anti-government, and if you were to yell freedom in the United States, it's also anti-government because the government is about taking away your freedom. But in particular, it's interesting what they're trying to do here is to associate this anti-communism that's arising in Cuba, that has probably been percolating for many decades. They're trying to associate it with some sort of right-wing and anti-establishment, anti-authority, anti-state, but at the same time that any advocacy for freedom in the United States is being associated with white supremacism. So they have to figure it as the sort of anti-government propaganda, because otherwise, they want to make sure that everything in the United States that's parallel to that is also dubbed that way.
Why is big tech? Why is social media, corporate media? Why are they trying to make this false equivalence between radical far right groups such as the white supremacists with people who are only fighting for their freedom? Why?
Well, they want to dub the whole populist movement and any kind of opposition to this globalist hegemony. They want to dub it as white supremacist and so forth to discredit it. And if they can smear it with these labels, then they'll discredit it, and everybody that speaks up is afraid to be tagged, to be labeled as a white supremacist. This way, they'll keep more people down and keep them from rising up. They want to keep people from realizing what's going on, so they want to keep dissidents. They want to keep them suppressed. One way to suppress them is to slur and slander them with these labels of white supremacist, or they're just privileged. You see, when they start using the word privilege all the time, be careful, because what they're trying to suggest is that your rights are being equated with privileges, and you can revoke privileges at any time. So that's why they use this word privilege all the time, because they intend to revoke these so-called privileges, which are really your rights.
Well, the main people who try to promote these anti-privilege worldview are college kids around my same age, millennials, Zoomers, and so. Why do you think that these people are the ones who are brainwashed in order to promote that kind of ideas?
Well, this was a long process that took place in the universities, and has now reached all the school levels. What we call grade school and high school here, primary, secondary education, and higher education, have all been taken over by leftist ideologues, and they are propagandizing in the place of education. What they're doing is these are basically ideological indoctrination centers where they preclude wrong-think by introducing right-think, which is, the kind of think they want, the kind of thinking they want. And they want these believers in socialism because, like I said, the socialism is what they're trying to establish on the ground. This actually existing socialism amongst the masses, equality and equity and all this nonsense, which is just a way of saying you'll all be equal, but you'll be equally depressed and equally oppressed and equally without rights and equally without property. All your privileges will be revoked. In other words, you will have nothing and be happy, just like the World Economic Forum says.
Right now, their main ideological direction is to push for critical race theory, which, well, I don't know why they are so obsessed with racial things, because that used to be one of the greatest shames of, well, the far right in the past,
Right.
with all of Nazism and everything that happened in Germany during World War II.
Well, they're trying to fabricate this idea that there's this vast white supremacism out there, which is just ludicrous. This is gaslighting in the extreme. There is no such thing. It's not real. They're trying to actually create it in a way so they can point to it and then try to suppress it and suppress others in the process. What they're using critical race theory for doing is to use it as a way of shaming and guilt tripping people into accepting lesser prospects and lesser rights and less property or no property. So basically they're shaming the majority. It doesn't help the minorities at all. In fact, it's very bad for them as well, because it makes them believe that they are utter victims and hapless victims of circumstance, that they can't get anywhere and there's nothing for them to do. It also pits these groups against each other and keeps them at each other's throats. So it's a real sinister ideology and propaganda campaign to shame and guilt trip and make the majority believe they're unworthy of whatever they have, that it all came vis-a-vis privilege, which must be taken away. So it's a stripping mechanism, a means to strip people of things. And then at the same time, it works on minorities by making them believe they have no prospects because of white supremacy. It's crazy.
Well, you did talk about populism a while ago. Do you think that populists, both in the United States and overseas, such as in Europe, in Latin America, could be some kind of stronghold or some kind of defense against these corporate socialists?
Yeah, first of all, populism arises when there's a deep mistrust of the elite, and when there's a sense that the elite are conning people and that they are that they don't have our interest at stake, that they in fact are working against our interests. So this is when populism rises. And they want to vilify populism because this is the main opposition to the elite. And it's going to continue to rise, although they're trying to smear it with every label in the book, and to make it look like it's reactionary, knuckle-dragging guerrillas who are just stupid and uneducated and so forth. You can only be smart if you buy into what the elite are saying about everything. Otherwise, you must be an idiot. This is what they're training people to believe, and they believe it. So dissidents are deemed reactionary idiots, and this is one of the ways in which they try to keep everybody under the same illusions by smearing dissidents with these terrible labels, and also making them look like they must be stupid, knuckle-dragging morons who just want to go backwards in history or something nonsensical like that. So populism is a reaction against the elite, and when people have lost all confidence in the elite, in fact, despise them. That's what it is.
Well, with the COVID lockdowns and the pandemic and everything, we saw that they try to do that with the people who actually try to understand what was going on with the mask mandates and right now with the vaccines. We don't have any kind of knowledge about how actually we're just being mandated to put a mask on our faces and to be vaccinated or else. All the
Or
people who
else.
are trying to say that no, we have to check first. They are saying no, you're anti-science. You're not following the
Anti-science, yes,
science.
this is the science, yeah.
It's some
See,
kind
this
of
is,
it's go on.
it's, yeah, it's a very warped scientism. What they're doing is they're setting up a scientific priestly caste who only allow certain viewpoints to be allowed to be heard. Therefore, it's actually anti-science. While they actually boast of it as following the science, they're actually anti-science because they don't allow inquiry. They don't allow free inquiry and investigation and any findings that come from that inquiry and investigation. So it's another form of gaslighting. Everything they're calling science is actually anti-science because science is about free and open inquiry, and they don't allow free and open inquiry. So they use this as a way of enforcing this particular view, which they claim to be based on science, but which shuts down most science entirely. And it is to enforce the agenda of vaccination and so forth. And there's no doubt that this vaccination regime is just beginning. This is not the end of it. This series, the first 2 shots, these are in a long line of vaccination pressure that's going to continue for years, for years. It's sad. I feel terrible for people that are younger than me. I am only going to live probably, 50, 60, 70, 80 more years. So at at 150, I'll still be hearing about this nonsense. I don't think it's going to stop. They're dead set on continuing this vaccine regime, and who knows what else is going to happen with it. I mean, I'm not saying they're putting chips in it now, chips to surveil upon us, not yet, but it's possible. It is possible, and if you want to see how possible it is, read my book, Thought Criminal, because that's the premise of the book.
Well, I don't think they don't need to put chips on the vaccines. They already have our smartphones and our social media. They know
Right.
everything about us.
Yes, they do, except for our genetic makeup and our body, our disease states, and our absolute whereabouts, because the phone can be left behind or put into a box so that the signals are not transmitted. But they're still, I mean, they're still trying to up the high technology of tracking, tracing, and surveillance, inclusive of possibly interruption of thinking. In other words, the possibility of actually controlling our minds is a prospect, actually. I've been looking into this through AI. I worked in artificial intelligence at the Robotics Institute in Carnegie Mellon, and I can tell you that these projects are on the table. That is the implementation of nanorobots that will be attached to the neurons of the neocortex and will transmit data back and forth to the cloud or the internet. And when you say back and forth, that means they'll be supplying thoughts and possibly precluding thoughts.
Well, the thing about artificial intelligence is, well, they are already trying to use some kind of algorithms in social media in order to feed us with the kind of content at least they want to make us believe that we want.
Yeah, that's right.
You see that we're receiving a continuous stream of news or of created content on the same themes, and I think that the younger people are the most exposed to these kind of contents because they are the ones
Yes.
consuming it.
They have also they're the most vulnerable because they haven't had the time to develop independent means of thinking. And so they're more apt to be steered by algorithmic steering or algorithmic nudging, and to be more predictive in their behavior, predictable in their behavior. So once, it takes years to develop independent thought, for some people at least, it did for me, to be able to think independently of organizations, institutions, and other apparatuses that are trying to control thought. And I think everybody is under a series of psyops campaigns at all times. We're being buffeted with psyops. We're being inundated with psyops, psychological warfare, at almost all times, in order to steer our thinking and behavior.
Well, you told us about property rights as some of the most important for people to be free. But what do you think about education? Because we're seeing that education has been weaponized in order to promote an ideology, which in this case is corporate socialism and wokeism and so on and so forth. But do you think that when people, for example, are classically educated, can become truly independent thinkers and can become people who will at least think for their own and not think what the regime is feeding them?
I would say what we need now is what I would call deschooling education, education that is outside of school, outside of all schools, and not just homeschooling for children, but autodidacticism for adults, a kind of purposeful self-expulsion from the institutions of higher and other learning, because these are the most dangerous institutions there are. They're actually the most dangerous ideological propagators that exist. At this point, these are noxious, poisonous places for the mind. So get away from them. Try to stay out of them and learn by yourself. Autodidacticism. This was practiced very strenuously by the working classes in the 19th century, and it needs to come back for the vast majority today.
Do you think that the Industrial Revolution and the Great Revolutions in the 19th century were the result of bourgeois and working classes actually learning by themselves?
Yeah, I mean, this was a great explosion in wealth production, to put it mildly. Of course, it's figured as this time when the working classes were subjected to industrial capitalism and wage slavery, as they put it. But the fact of the matter is that the standard of living for the vast majority rose exponentially over that period. And the labeling of it as bourgeois by the left is just a way of dismissing the obvious benefits that came from free market enterprise. It's never fully free. It's always, there's never a free market, but it's when the ideal of the free market entered and when industrial capitalism emerged, the standard of living went up dramatically for all peoples across the board. And that should continue, but that's definitely not in the agenda today. But no, yes, I think there was a great deal of self-learning. There was a great deal of autodidacticism. It did rebel against the educational institutions of the time, like Oxford and Cambridge and in England, for example, and they started to have working class education for and by themselves. And they started to challenge the institutions, the dominant institutions who were basically teaching nothing but Latin, Greek, and theology. If people wanted to learn what they called useful knowledge, and useful knowledge became the watchword for self-education. So we're going to see, and hopefully a new emergence of something analogous to that in our own time.
But the problem is that people need credentials, and that the
Yes, that is a
regime
big
and
problem.
everything is based on credentials. I mean, if you don't have some kind of diploma or some kind of title that allows you to do something, people are not going to believe that you actually have the knowledge to do so.
That's correct. That's correct. That's why parallel institutions do need to rise to emerge that challenge the credentialing systems of these other institutions, and that eventually compete with and win against them. These institutions are rotted to the core. So other institutions need to emerge that challenge those institutions in their credentialing, legitimating function. What they are is institutions of legitimation to make people legitimate. We need other means of legitimating people's knowledge bases and experience.
Do you think that to create parallel institutions is as easy as it may sound? I mean, people are trying. The people are Hills, they call it, the guys at the Mises Institute. And well, I can think of so many other institutions in the US, but it's not that easy because, for example, let's see, all of the great people in government, they are either Ivy League graduates or something like that.
Yes, they use these credentials as a means of legitimating particular people, and then those people are indoctrinated in the process so that then their views become the only legitimate views. That's how it works. So it is very difficult to erect counter parallel institutions. It'll take time. It's not going to happen overnight. And I'm not here to say that we can do this tomorrow. It is definitely a process that will take time. It took 50, 60 years for them to destroy the current institutions. It'll take another 50 to build parallel ones, or to gut those completely and start over.
Well, also, you see that most of the people who are credentialed and have these great universities, diplomas, and everything, they spend a lot of money to get those. And most of the people who really don't have the means to get that kind of education, they stay as some kind of, well, I'm gonna use Laurie Johnson's term. I think she's a distributist, so she's on the Christian side of politics. She calls them the precariat.
The precariat, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. The precariat, yeah, yeah. We need to. I mean, they have, yeah. There's a lot of people have been reduced to very precarious means of income, and when you're outside of these major institutions, you are subject to becoming a precariat, and this is one of the this is going to be one of the reasons why, you know, universal basic income and other types of state measures are going to be attractive to a lot of people who have been living on very precarious income, Uberized economy, if you will. You know, basically people living on independent and basically, what do we call it? You know, people renting out their homes for money, and people driving their cars and delivering other people's food and delivering other people to their locations. All this stuff, these are very precarious work, and that's going to make this universal basic income very attractive to a lot of people, unfortunately, because it'll also be means of enslaving them entirely.
We're already seeing this with the stimulus checks in the United States. In other countries, because we don't have the means, because we're actually poorer, for example, in Latin America, we haven't seen that. But in the US, you're seeing that a lot of people who are living on welfare.
Yeah, I mean, they're gonna. I mean, there's a way they're ruling out welfare, rolling it out across the whole population, making it such that most people will be really dependent on the state at some point. This is not the case yet, though. There's a lot of it because there's production backups and the emergence of shortages because people are on unemployment. and they do better on unemployment than they would working. At least they think so, or at least it's, you don't have to do anything for it except file something. So this, unfortunately, though, is because of the lack of opportunities as the middle class is destroyed. The answer is not universal basic income. The answer is to actually get rid of these oligarchical monopolists who are controlling all the economy.
Well, because we're already almost an hour talking, so
yeah,
some of your ideas do remind me of some other thinkers. For example, your whole the religious control of education and institutions reminds me of what this neo-reactionary called Mencius Moldbug. Well, he's actually
Mencius Moldbug.
The Arvin.
I mean, I agree with his cathedral model about the institutions. The cathedral. I mean, I don't believe in like going back to monarchy or something like that. But I do agree with his assessment. I think it's one of the best ones out there. The cathedral understanding of what's going on. This is basically a kind of papacy, where you have the cathedral that gives the main proclamations that have to be accepted, and then they funnel out through the media. And the main center of the cathedral is the academy, the university system. I think Moldbug's right. He's very, very funny and quite smart. I read everything. I don't care if they label it this, that, and the other thing. They're not going to stop me that way.
Some other ideas of yours remind me, for example, of the Juvenal's model on power, the way it is exercised by an elite and some kind of ground soldiers on the bottom, and also on Donoso Cortés' theory of the revolution, that we have to somehow overthrow the elite in order to restore or to create a new kind of society that is better for the people in the middle.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is I'm wary of terms like revolution in this sense, because it's been co-opted entirely by communists and socialists. And so they think a revolution is about destroying capitalism, whereas the revolution I want is to make capitalism available to everybody. That's the key. Capitalism available to all people. That is the only answer.
Well, and that would be as well as democracy for everyone, because we're seeing some kind of representative formal democracy for people to cast a ballot, and then the elites are staying in power, instead of, self-government and community building.
Yes, I think democracy follows directly from the free market economics. Once you're represented in production, that is, as consumers, your demands are represented in the productive apparatuses, then democracy in the political sphere follows from that. So in that sense, I'm a slight economic determinist, and that I hold that democracy flows from property.
All right. So thank you very much, Professor Rectenwald. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. It's been a great talk. And, well, I hope to have you on the channel anytime soon. It's been great. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Okay. Bye-bye.